So, PCI standard, payment card industry. Again, the major credit card companies working together to form a standard on how to secure information about credit cards whenever they are used for buying things. So all organizations that store, process, transmit cardholder data do so in a secure environment. That is the purpose of this standard. And together with the standard is a certification. So dependent on how many transactions you have a year, or how much money you are transferring through a credit card, you can reach different levels. And the more money you are handling in this way, the higher accreditation you need. You need to meet more and more demands in terms of showing that you actually have good security in your system, that you have an organization to handle all of these issues on. We'll come back a little bit on the details. So there are different levels of requirements that you need to meet. But it requires anyone that is handling that data. So if you set up a web store and you ask the customer to give you the credit card information, credit card number, name, you are part of this. If you are a bank that handles it, if you set up a web hotel and handle some type of plugin so to handle payment for your customers, then you are responsible. So anyone that actually is dealing with that can see the credit card information at any stage of this processing is covered by this standard. So they need to comply with the standards and be checked that they live up to it. So as you see, these again are the major credit card companies that is part of it. And they have a council that sets the standard. The standard is an entire architecture, and not just one standard actually. The main one is this one, the PCI DSS standard, the Data Security Standard. That covers, as you see, merchants and processors, anyone that processes credit card information, or if you set up a store that handles credit card information, you need to comply. Then you have this PCI PA-DSS standard, the payment application vendor. That is for software development. So if you develop some application, whatever that handles it, there are requirements for you as well. And we have this PCI PTS standard, PIN transaction. That is for manufacturers of terminals and so on, where you enter your credit cards, to type in the PIN code, whatever. They also need to comply with certain regulations. So these are the main part of the PCI standard, but there are other parts as well, but this is the most important one. And the PCI DSS is the biggest one that covers most people. In the standard, I talk about security practices, 12 best security practices. And they're breaking down, let's see, to 6 categories. So this is the type of things that you need to show that you actually live up to. You need to be able to show that you have a secure network. In that, you need to show that you have encrypted information whenever it's needed, that you have firewalls and so on. So there are specific things that you need to live up to. Protect the cardholder data, that it's encrypted whenever it's stored. You have access controls to it and so on. That you have a vulnerability management program, so whenever a vulnerability or incident occurs, that you have a structured way to handle it. Strong access control measures in all parts of the system. That you actually test your network. You do these penetration tests now and then, that you monitor things. Maybe you should have an IDS system, whatever. And that you have a security policy, and so the administrative part of IT security is also covered here. So there are quite a few things that you need to live up to, and there are independent companies that are checking this. So they go in and do reviews on a company that would like to meet up, and then they have regular checkup each year, or even more often if you're one of the biggest users of credit card. The current version of PCI DSS is 3.2.1 from last year. The status of it is that in United States, as you see, in parts of the United States, it's actually a law now. So then there's no way to get around it. In most part of the United States, even if it's not a law, it's actually so strong that you need to have it. You couldn't get away from it. Outside the United States, it's more of a voluntary standard that you can follow. But if you handle large part of or high volumes of money, the credit card companies can bind you to follow it, because even if it's not a law, you have agreements. And if you set up an agreement with MasterCard or Visa that you would like to be able to handle them, they can require that you meet this standard. Otherwise, they wouldn't sign a contract with you. So even if it's not a law, it's quite strong. And it has been growing in coverage as well. This last point is interesting because it is quite hard to live up with it, especially since you need these reviews, and so it's quite costly. So many organizations try to avoid it by outsourcing the payment handling. So they are using payment service providers instead. So many web shops today, even if you can enter a credit card and buy with the web store itself doesn't have that information about the credit card. It's outsourced to a payment service provider. You've probably seen in Sweden, for instance, you have a Klarna that is used by many web shops. They are one of these. And that means a web shop doesn't actually have to live up to the PCI standard. It's the service provider that needs to do it. So you can get around it that way. Now, let's talk about money. What is money? Physical or electronic tokens or commodities that can or should have the following properties. Should have a defined value. So you should know, if you see money, you should know what it's worth, of course. In most cases, if you have a coin or something, it's printed on it, the value. Sometimes it's not printed on, but you know what the worth value is anyway. It should be possible to exchange, so you should be able to give it to someone else and they will accept it as money. So it actually can be a way to do transactions that way. And it should hold the value, so it's not perishable. Which is, of course, not true, because if you take a banknote and put it in a fire, it will perish. So there are limitations for it, but yeah. So that's quite wide then in definition. Early money were commodities or objects of a perceived worth. If you go to Polynesia, they had these shells that were seen as money. So you had necklaces with a number of shells, and then, yeah, that is something. You can buy a pig from that or something like that. So it was an exchange. In the Hansa times here in Europe, they had certain goods that were seen as the base value. So everything was measured in these goods. A barrel of salt, whatever. I'm not sure exactly what they had, but that could have been it. And then everything else was related to that. So a cargo of wool was the same as 10 barrels of salt or something like that. But later on, we had minted coins. And the Code of Hammurabi is probably one of the oldest here. You had precious metals, and you weighted them, and then you just put a stamp on and say, okay, this is 5 grams of gold, for instance. And then everyone know that, okay, 5 grams of gold is worth something, and you can use it as an exchange. That later on turned into normal coins then. But the difference between these coins, early coins and later coins, is that the early coins actually had that value. It was worth that, because it was actually gold or silver. That's not the case anymore. Then later on we moved on to trade bills. So just a paper showing some worth, and there are different types of that. At some time we had a network here in Europe of goldsmiths that were connected. So all the major cities had goldsmiths that knew about each other. So you could go into goldsmith in say, Venice, deposit 50 grams of gold or some other goods with value, and then you got a note saying, okay, this guy has deposited this amount of value to goldsmith, and then you can go to London and then just give them that note and you could get gold back. So they had an exchange between these goldsmiths. They had built up this network, and so that you could accept them even if you didn't, so you didn't have to transfer money yourself in that way. So these are some early ideas. Later on came banks. And the purpose of a bank is mainly to loan out money and to accept to have a bank account where you can put money in. But in order to facilitate that, they introduced banknotes to make it easy to handle that. So loans were based on deposits, but when you withdraw something or put in something, you got a statement saying, okay, you had deposited this amount. And then they created these private banknotes then. Later, we had national currency instead. So we have government organization that is taking care of the national currencies. So it's not private banks anymore. Even though in the United States, you may know it's a little bit special because the central bank in the United States is actually not a government, it's a company who's running the US dollar. But of course it's influenced by the government, but that's a special case. Otherwise, national currency typically are handled directly by government organizations from a central reserve bank, and initially they were backed by gold or silver. So you had a vault with 5 tons of gold, and then you issued banknotes with that value, and that could be used. And if you needed more money in the country to print out new banknotes, you had to put more gold in that vault. So you always could actually go and exchange it for gold. That was the idea. And they backed off from that a little bit different in different countries, where you didn't really need to have that stored gold or silver anymore. Again, United States had it for quite a long time. So for a long time it was still possible to go to the central bank with your dollar and say, I would like to have this in gold instead. So now we have different type of currencies then. But well, again, different type of currencies. We have the free private currencies for the free banking system, so anyone could issue them. We have something called commodity currencies. We'll come back to that. And then we have the world currency, what we normally mean with currencies today. There are actually 2 different parts of that. We have what's called hard currency, which are some currencies that are thought to be more stable, more secure than others. And then the rest are called soft currencies. There are still natural currencies, but they are not trusted as much. The private currencies then are connected to the free banking system that we mentioned before. And the legality of establishing these banks has also been different in different periods and in different countries. So in some countries it has been allowed for a long time. In other countries it hasn't been allowed at all, so it differs. But in many places of the world it has been possible to establish free banking with their own currencies. A limitation to that has come during the years. more and more restrictions around handling money and handling currencies. And one of these examples are in the United States, the Bank Secrecy Act. And the main idea with these regulations is that currency or money is connected with crime, and we need to be able to stop crime by having check on money transactions. And if money transactions are totally private with no insight from the government, it's not possible to do that. So we need to be able to regulate and have control of it. And that has been turned off one step at a time. And you've probably seen that today. Even if you open a bank account in Sweden today, you have to actually answer some questions about your association with different organizations in the United States and so on. If you have come, and so they will actually share information about your private bank account in Sweden with United States. So United States have a long reach on checking transactions in the world. So that's the private currency. But then we have what we call the community currencies. There have been different community currencies in different parts of the world. We have this Ithaca Hours in New York that was meant to be, as you see, 8 hours. So it's a banknote saying that this is worth 8 hours of work. So you can go to a plumber or whatever and say, okay, work for 8 hours for me. And you can buy them. Berkshires were also similar, but they had actually a worth of, well, a Berkshire dollar, and that was directly connected with normal US dollars, but not at the, it was a fixed rate, but it was not one-to-one. So you could buy a Berkshire dollar for, I'm not sure exactly how it was, but the idea was that whenever you used that, part of that revenue would be used for social welfare and different cultural activities and so on. So every time you used these Berkshires, it gave some added money that could be used for in the social, in the society around here in Massachusetts, Berkshire, Massachusetts. Actually, the same was for Ithaca. The idea that it should give some extra revenue that could be used for in a society. And we have these Toronto dollars that were also similar, but didn't have exactly the same mechanism. So all of these are local currencies. All of them were active for a number of years. You see the Toronto dollar for quite a while. But all of them are now out of business. And then we have the world currencies. And there are two types of world currencies. Well, we sort of have the hard and soft. But we also have what is called the IMF, International Monetary Fund, that has something called special drawing rights. That is not really normal money. But if a country needs to borrow, say Greece for a number of years, they have to borrow quite a lot of international support to what they did was they went to IMF and got special drawing rights. So they didn't got dollars or euros, they got these drawing rights. That's seen as a normal currency. That can be a change for other currencies if needed later on. So that is another type of world currency that is not a national one, but international one. But most of them are these normal natural currencies then. We call the currency we have today fiat money, modern fiat money, and that is that we have went away from this idea that we need to have gold or silver in the vault somewhere that covers money. Instead, the money is backed by a state typically, and saying that, okay, we vouch for this money, and it's the reputation of our state that gives it its value. But it's always susceptible to public distrust in the world and in the country, and that's why we have these floating exchange rates. It's mainly dependent on the trust in different countries and how well they can back their currencies. If you look here in Sweden, you see the central bank of Sweden called Riksbanken. They had a monopoly to issue banknotes and coins since 1904, so no private banking in Sweden in terms of banknotes or currencies since then. So that's normal money. If we now talk about electronic money, we have two views on that, as you see. We have something called a narrow view. And that is tokens of exchange transaction only electronically. So there should be a currency that is only exists as an electronic currency. And there are quite a few of these example currencies. Facebook Gold. What's a new one? Facebook Libra. Yeah. But you have Bitcoin, Ether, so on, lots of these electronic currencies that are only available as electronic currencies. And you can exchange them directly. You can take one Bitcoin and give to someone else electronically and buy something with it. So you don't need to have any bank account or whatever, you just exchange the money directly. So that's the narrow that is required. But in the broad view of electronic money, we also say that any time we actually exchange information about electronic payments, it's electronic money. So that would also include if you use your credit card to buy something, because it's an electronic transaction, but backed by a normal currency then, of course. Pay something with a number of kronas or dollars, whatever. So it's depends on what you look, but if you look at the narrow view, then we have Bitcoin as probably the most prominent example. Created by someone called Satoshi Nakamoto, which was a pseudonym, and later it's probably that is this guy Craig Stephen Wright, lives in Australia, who is behind this pseudonym. His idea was to build up a cryptocurrency that is independent of everyone else. And the strength of it is that the standard is open and anyone can see it, anyone can understand it, and that way you can get trust in it. It doesn't need to be backed up by any country or any other organization. Started in 2009. It's built as a peer-to-peer transaction. So whenever you want to buy something, you need to do a signature. You sign your Bitcoin and pass it on to someone else. But in order to get the stability in Bitcoin, you also need to note this in what is called a ledger. And that is a distributed ledger. That means it's run by thousands of computers around the world, that as a distributed system to keep track of all the transactions. So whenever you pay for something, you have to enter it in this distributed ledger, and that has to be distributed to everyone else, so everyone is in sync. Yeah, a blockchain. Yeah, that's a blockchain technology behind it. That's right. You store Bitcoins in what's called e-wallets, and you trade them typically or change them for special virtual currency exchanges. There are a number in the world that you can do, and you can, in these you can also exchange them for normal currencies. There are others, as I said, Ethereum, Swiftcoin, Ripple. There are a number of these. They are entirely separate. They build up their own universe, you can say, on what is money and how they're handled, but they all work in very similar way using this blockchain technology and the distributed ledger. Now, what is the driving force again behind Bitcoin? Well, the driving force is that there are a number of Bitcoins available in the world. 21 million, to be exact. And that's what is available. And you can find them. And if you find a Bitcoin, it's yours to use. And you do it by something called you're mining for Bitcoins. And what you do is really you are solving cryptographic puzzles, you can say. You're looking for hashes that meet certain criteria. And if you find one of those, you have solved one of these puzzles, and then you have also explored this Bitcoin. While doing that, you also support this distributed ledger, and that is the driving force of it. You are mining, and while you do that, to be able to possibly find some Bitcoin, you also support the infrastructure for Bitcoin. At some stage, all of these Bitcoins will have been found, and then the question is what will happen, because no one will mine anymore. But you also get some, for each transaction that is performed, you also get a small percentage of that transaction. So the idea is that it should still be able to keep this infrastructure running, even if you couldn't mine anymore. When I checked yesterday, about almost 80 million Bitcoins have been found. So there's only about 3 million still to be found. But it will take a lot of time, maybe not 1 year, because actually the rate has gone up a little bit at the end. So maybe it will only be 50 or 75 years, but it will take a long time still. And the reason for that is that the complexity is built into the Bitcoin system, that the fewer that is left, the harder it will be to find the next one. So it will be harder and harder work to find the next Bitcoin. A Bitcoin is really an address, and that address is really a public key, a cryptographic public key. So a Bitcoin can look like this. That is how you present it. In order to prove that you actually own this, there is of course a matching private key, so it's using public key encryption here. And in order to use it, you have to sign the usage of it using your private key. So that is how you prove you own it and that you can pass it on to someone else. So each Bitcoin transaction is signed by the person who owns the private key. Where should you store these private keys? Well, you can store them wherever you want to. You can keep them for yourself on a paper or in your computer, but most people don't do that. They actually store them in these e-wallets handled by different exchange places. So you have a digital wallet somewhere else that keeps your Bitcoins for you. That means you have quite a lot of value stored there, and there have been a number of hacks against these. So that's how Bitcoin has been hacked, that people's private keys have been exploited in these exchange places. So it's not the Bitcoin itself that has been hacked, it's how you have protected your private keys that has been hacked. In that way, I think almost, I saw a figure somewhere, 2-3 million Bitcoins have been lost in that way. So it's quite a lot that has been lost in that way. And some of them has been lost forever because the private keys have been actually lost. That means you have to mine them again to find them, but they're gone. So this is how transactions work. The owner's first public key is a hash you sign with your private key. That is how you perform a transaction that goes on to the next owner, and then the next owner can sign it, pass it on, and the entire chain here will follow. So if you look at a Bitcoin, you can see how it has been used, how many times it has been used, all the different parts of a transaction. But you don't see who owned that private key. You can only see what private keys was used. So the idea is that it should be anonymous in that way, that you don't know who it was, who had that private key. There have been examples when that has been able to be able to trace back to who owned it. So there have been some breaches on the privacy. Yeah.
For example, in Germany we had a case that there was a guy who was running a darknet shop for drugs.
Yeah.
And then to run this place, he was getting bitcoins from other people, so he could run the shop. And at one day, he was changing these bitcoins into real world currency, into euros. And so the police could just like track this bitcoin signature to the exchange point, and then they could get his banking details because they could reach this exchange checkpoint. And so they knew his real name, his real banking account, and so they got him.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
Exactly.
not anonymous. You can always trace it back, and you can trace it back really good.
Yes, you can trace it back, but it's not always that you can trace back to a person. It's only possible if that person is actually, as you say, trading for real currency. If you just trade to another person, it's no link between you. So it's in that way, it's not so easy to trace back.
If somebody finds it, you can see all of your, like if you're getting someone and you're getting it, the police is getting into your house and they find your private key, they can basically track back all your transactions you're doing.
Yeah, you can follow the transaction, but you don't see who owned the key in each step. They can only follow that it has been used for a certain number of steps and what keys was used. But it's not directly that you can link it to the different person who owned these keys. So in some cases it's possible, but not in general. And if it were generally possible, you wouldn't use Bitcoin for ransomware and darknet and so on, because then it would be useless. Yeah.
I think you mean if you have like your Bitcoin on the exchange website or something, yeah, maybe because when you register for website, they take everything about you, all details. But if you have like private wallet, offline wallet,
Yeah.
they cannot do anything about it.
Yeah, exactly. So if you have your private wallet for yourself, it's much harder. So, well, let's see here. Yeah, let's move on to the last part here. The price of Bitcoin fluctuates quite a lot. Yesterday it was around $225 for one Bitcoin. Yeah, I checked it yesterday.
$225 Bitcoin.
224.82. The peak value, that was December 2007, it's only 6% of that. It was up to, what is it, 3,800, something like that, at the maximum. You don't believe it?
No, because I follow.
Yeah, but these were the official figures from yesterday.
It's 8,262.
This is Bitcoin Cash. Is that Bitcoin or Bitcoin?
Should be Bitcoin $2.
This is Bitcoin Cash.
Yeah, okay.
There's a difference between Bitcoin
Right,
Cash and Bitcoin.
yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So let's forget about the exact figures, but the trend is exactly the same. If when you started with Bitcoin, it was it less than $1 even?
Yeah,
Yeah, cents. And it was quite stable for many years. It didn't happen very much. It was slowly raising. But then suddenly, as you see, in 2013, things started to happen, and we had the first top. And then it went down again, and then we had some huge tops here. For someone, say an organization who is offering Bitcoin as a possible way to buy things, this is a bit scary, because you set a price in 1 Bitcoin, but you don't really know for the next day if that is half that worth or not. So this fluctuating prices is a problem for Bitcoin. So there are some criticism. The volatile exchange rate is one. The inflexible supply is another one, because there is a maximum number of Bitcoins. We couldn't get more. A state that starts to have problems with money just prints new money. There's no end of it. Bitcoin couldn't do that because it's built into the system that it is limited. There is, well, high risk, you could argue, but there is a risk of loss. Loss because of exchange rate, but also loss because these exchange places have been hacked and so on. It's not used that wide. You couldn't go to any store and buy with Bitcoin. There are places there you can use it, but it's very limited. And this main point is probably the major one right now, that Bitcoin has been associated with illegal activity. There's a lot of illegal payment that's done in Bitcoin, and therefore it's not something that governments is looking on with pleasure. They really try to limit. So there have been limitations on the possibility to exchange Bitcoins with normal currencies, or trying to limit the use of it. So there is a press on Bitcoin in order to how to use it. But it is still used, of course. You can dig a little bit deep if you want to. I have some links here, tells a little bit more about Bitcoin. E-krona is an initiative from the Swedish Riksbank to establish some type of digital currency in Sweden as a complement to the normal natural or physical currency. It's not decided yet exactly how it will work. They have two ideas. Either it will work as Bitcoin, as a separate currency that you can directly transfer from one person to another, but it will be backed by the normal currency, so it will have a value that is fixed, so it will be more secure in Bitcoin in that regard. Or the other alternative is that it will always be linked to a bank account. So whenever you make a transaction, you're just moving money from one bank account to another bank account, which will not make it anonymous. And that is one of the major things they are considering here. Should it be possible to make anonymous purchases with e-krona or not? And even if they go for the model where you can directly change money between two people, it's possible that they still build in some way to trace the transactions, because they are afraid it will be used like Bitcoin for illegal purposes. But we'll see. But they are talking about that it should be online perhaps in a year or two. So they don't have a long time. And they already are working with different IT companies to actually build it. And there are in other countries there are similar ideas. So it's something that is popping up in many places. And for that reason, there's also a standardization working on in ISO to standardize how to build these e-currencies. But they probably will not wait for that standard here in Sweden. And as I said, there are other ones. Ethereum is one of them. That is interesting because even if Ethereum is also connected to a currency called Ether, it is also a more general blockchain system that also supports something called smart contracts. So you can use it not only for direct money transfer, you can do other things as well. You can link what is called a smart contract. You issue some service, and then automatically when that service is fulfilled, you can get a transaction or something based on it. So you link in different actions within a signed document. And Ethereum had almost 100% of that marketplace a year or two ago. But now others have emerged, like this EOS or Tron, that have gained a lot of marketplace in the last year. They are faster, typically. That's the main problem with all these blockchain systems, that the transaction takes time because you have to enter it into the distributed ledger. It has to be synchronized, and it takes a while before you get the encourage, okay, now it's okay. For Ethereum, for instance, when I talk about the typical transaction takes 13 seconds before you get a validation. Yeah?
Yeah, I think Bitcoin and Ethereum differ in their work, how they work, because Bitcoin is based on a proof of work system, and Ethereum and many other new cryptocurrencies are based on proof of stake
Yeah,
systems.
that's
So
right. We have this.
that's why they don't need so much work to create a new coin, you can say,
Yeah.
compared to a Bitcoin.
Yeah, yeah. They are built a little bit in different ways, but they are both using the blockchain technology in the bottom. And blockchain in general is a technology that has emerged a lot in last years. Where people are trying to apply it to a lot of different things. Actually, I think I will post a video of a criticism against blockchain that it can't solve every problem that people think it can solve, but that's that's another thing. So this is just show that there is a lot of things going on, and it is a volatile market. A lot of things are happening, new actors, new technologies, and you need to follow it, if you're interested in this area quite closely. Yeah.
I know something, but I don't understand it. They said like Ethereum they used to build application. They help developer to build. It's like a platform to build application. How, if you know anything about this, I really don't understand.
Okay. Well, we have to take that later. Yeah. Because I also want to mention something about mobile payments. That is also something that has emerged and is taking on more and more. The idea to use your mobile phone to pay for something, and as a digital wallet. There have been a number of systems from different manufacturers, Apple Pay, Samsung Pay, and so on, that are now used. Apple Pay, for instance, launched 2014. I didn't update this year. Last year it was 30 countries. I'm sure it has grown now. The idea with these type of mobile payments is typically to replace a credit or debit card. What you do is you have already a debit or credit card, and then you just use your phone as a replacement of a card. So you still use the credit card transaction in behind, but instead of showing your card, you show your phone. That's the main idea with all these systems. And then the technology can be a little bit different. So Apple Pay, for instance, is using NFC transactions only. That means you need to have and in the store they need to have one of these NFC card readers, which is in Europe is not a problem because almost everyone have them now, but in United States it's still quite a lot of only magnet swipe. So it doesn't work that well in United States still. That is one reason why Samsung Pay actually also support magnetic stripe terminals. They have implemented a protocol that makes it possible to hold up your phone next to the magnetic swipe, and it will create a magnetic field that can actually interact with a reader in the magnetic swipe. Without, you don't have to draw the phone through the swipe, that would be hard. You just have to hold it next to it, and it will actually register. Both of these are trying to keep the privacy of a purple. That's one of the main things. They don't trace how you use your credit card. They only forward that information. And that is quite a strong thing. They are trying to push that they are doing that. And so far I haven't seen anyone that have been able to show that they are actually violating this. There is also mobile payments without credit cards. Here in Sweden we have Swish, that you don't need a credit for. There are other countries that have them. In China it was actually the main thing. You haven't gone through the credit cards, you just use the phone directly. In Africa it's the same, you use mobile transactions directly without credit cards. And then typically you move from one bank account to another directly without having the credit card on. And in Europe there is now a new association called European Mobile Payments Systems Association that tries to make this work on an international level, because all these systems have been national so far. But as you see now, Swedish Swish, we have a Norwegian Vips, which is the same as on several of these in different countries, are now working together to create so it will be possible to pay with mobile directly in different countries between these systems. So this is something that is growing. And that was the last slide, so we almost made it in time. So this is the last lecture. We'll have a lecture later on that is just going back and look at an old exam you can ask questions on. So, and we'll do a Kahoot, of course, at that time as well. But otherwise, for the rest of the study period, you are to work with a practical work now then. So good luck with that, and see you just one time more before the exam.